So one of the last things that Manjit just said is identity is individual, and we've had an awful lot today about individual identity, security, protection, looking at the various aspects. It's fundamentally important that we consider the individuals as the first part of security, the first part of what we do, the first part of identity. My section here, which I'll try and meet the 15 minutes, is very much about organisation identity being a parallel and just as valuable identity type as individual. What I want to do is run through a number of case studies, 3 mini case studies that should look at why that's the case, and then just some backgrounds behind organisation identity as well. So when we talk about organisation identity, what do I actually mean by that? Organisation identity really is as simple as it sounds. So there are many different types of organisations. You can start with the basic definition, a social group, a family as you go up, a more constructed unit, a contractual definition of an organisation. So maybe it's something where people are joined together, a tenants association, something like that. There's a contractual bond around that organisation side. Finally, the highest level is a legal entity, so a business organisation, a corporate organisation. And that's what I suspect many of you here today are representing, and you're here representing the organisations that you work for, and many of you are interacting with on that point. Just with individual identity, there's assurance levels associated with that as well. So we have low assurance organisation identity. Again, it's like a Facebook account, but it's around a social group. It could be a group on Facebook, right? That could be the low assurance organisation identity, or just some self-declared association. Up to high assurance, where there is a whole governance process, a whole registration mechanism behind that identity that gives you national scale to that identity validity, just as you have with your citizen identity. Exactly the same parallels that sit there. So if organisation identity is important, there must be some value that we can associate behind this, okay? I'd like to walk through 3 examples of why that is. So the first mini case study, and this is going to be the good, the bad, the ugly in terms of what we look at here. So in terms of the good, this is an example from a customer that we deployed actually back in 2008, so a long time ago, Finnish government. We deployed a platform that allowed them to take individuals and organisations, combine them together, and then provide representation services and delegation services for those people on behalf of the organisation. And that was used by a number of services. The Finnish government is very good, it's very transparent. 2018, they released a number of public stats. They release them every year, but it varies each year on what they release them on. 2018, it covered this platform. And it showed at that time that there were just under 450,000 individual identities in there, just over 400,000 organisation identities. Each one of those organisations running self-administration on their organisation in that platform. And that was integrated to over 100 government services. One of those services was the tax office, and the tax office, through running this and having this, managed to save themselves 99% of their costs in servicing tax transactions. So these numbers are public record from the Finnish government. This is not our calculation, this is not some marketing piece. This is information released by the Finnish government. The ability to allow an individual to be associated with an organisation at a high assurance level, combined together, delegate that association, delegate that representation, and then remove all of the infrastructure you have as a serving organisation is where those cost reductions came from. They took the cost of processing a tax transaction from 30 euros down to 20 euro cents through that online operation, through understanding organisation and representing of individuals associated with the organisation. That's the first example of organisation value. There are negative examples as well. So we need to understand organisation identity. So the bad. You may remember, almost a year ago, Elon Musk bought Twitter. Shortly after that, went through cost cutting. One of the first things to go was the blue check. The result of that were a number of fake accounts created, a number of different business and individual fake accounts that got created as a result of that happening. One of those was the Eli Lilly account, and that post was made, insulin is now free. The effect of that post was a 4.5% drop in their stock price overnight. That's $15 billion wiped off their market cap overnight. If you're a CFO of a publicly traded organisation and you lose $15 billion overnight, you're going to have a very bad day the next day. More than that, if you're a day trader and you've lost 4.5% of your value, it's annoying. It's annoying. It's one of those things. If you're a bad actor looking to take a leveraged position, knowing that you can generate a 4.5% drop on a stock, that's a phenomenal return. So the risk of not understanding organization identity is that fraudulent announcement, the ability to manipulate and to take that position. But it gets worse. We also have the ugly in the trio of the examples. This is a horrible diagram. It's from the IMF. Some of you are as old as me and remember everything that crashed in 2007, 2008. This is why it crashed. This is what caused that 2008 crash, or one of the initiators of the crash. Residential mortgage-backed securities, common across the world. When you create those securities, those mortgages, they get split into tranches. And you get the AAA stuff, which is really great, and you've got very low risk, but you get low returns. And you've got the low subprime side of that, which is high risk, but you get great interest returns when everything is going well. But selling off the subprime bit of those securities is difficult. People don't really want to take that. So what do? You wrap them into a different product, which then has a AAA bit at the top. So you can now go back to selling a AAA proposition, even though it's AAA on something a bit dubious. That's the CDO, collateralized debt obligation. So a number of these organizations created these CDOs, put their subprime into that, and sold it on. But again, they were left with the bottom tranche, which is the really nasty stuff. So what do? Well, you take all those together and fold them into another CDO, and you get CDO squared. The bottom of that is pretty horrific. Now, if there's still, the market is good and there's no problems, you'll still get a fantastic return from that bottom level of that CDO squared. But as soon as there's any volatility, any disturbance in that market, the whole lot collapses. Now, what happens if the people at the bottom of that chain happen to be in the same organizational consolidation chain or same organization as the people at the top of that chain? You've now got a circular loop. And once that circle gets disturbed, the whole thing unwinds catastrophically. And that was the effect. So that unwind is what brought down the markets in 2008 and was why the G20 at that point decided they had to get control on organization identity and understand the causes of this and what they could do to prevent or attempt to prevent this happening again. So for them, at that point in time, the G20 got involved in organization identity. So if we now take the view that organization identity could be important, what can we do? What can we use as organization identities? Last year, the World Trade Organization published a couple of reference documents, one of them a standards toolkit on identity, on cross-border trade, paperless trade. That identifies 4 different possible identities you can use for organization identity. I'm not going to go through the detail. I think you get all these slides later. There's a web link where you can download the standards toolkit at the bottom. Suffice it to say, the only available organization identity, which is highly assured, globally available, open access, is the legal entity identifier. The legal entity identifier actually was created as a direct result of that 2008 financial crisis. That's what the Financial Stability Board will put in place to address. This is the proposition that they, through various subgroups, came up with and launched through the G20. That's where the LEI came from. So that legal entity identifier gives us that ability to understand an organization, who they are and who they're owned by. That's what the LEI provides, and that, from that definition, you can see how it solves that, or could solve that 2008 financial issue. So where does the LEI fit, and how is it put about? What's happening? As I said, it's established by the Financial Stability Board. That is what they were formed for, to put this in place, endorsed by the G20. It identifies a legal entity, and it tells you who is who and who owns whom. That's the whole point of a legal entity identifier. In the majority of countries that trade now, you will find there are regulations that say for any leveraged trade, no LEI, no trade. So they have to understand the consolidation chains for any leveraged proposition. That's the regulatory basis that's intended to protect against the reoccurrence of that 2008 scenario. However, the side effect of the LEI being introduced is we now have a globally available, open access, highly assured organization identity. And that's the value that the LEI is bringing to all of the identity and access management systems that we see going forwards and are there. In terms of how prevalent it is, today, we have growing traction. So from 2017, 500,000 were issued. Today, we're actually sitting at about 2.5. The G20 have now set a target on the GLIFE, Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, the group that was set up by the G20 under the FSB to manage, regulate, deliver this, make sure it is a highly assured identity. That target is for 20 million by 2027. How are we going to achieve 20 million by 2027? 20 million is a good number. Once we get to 20 million, we'll be at critical mass. It will self-adopt across the various use cases that then take that and use that. So what are the drivers for that right now? There's a number of operations drivers that are happening. You've actually heard about some of them indirectly already today. The World Trade Organization is one, with their push for cross-border digital payments, digital trade. A number of countries now are changing law so that you no longer have to have a piece of paper for your bill of lading. It can be an electronic document. Here in the Netherlands, here in Belgium, it's still a piece of paper. The UK, 3 weeks ago, had royal assent on the law which changed to say you can do it digitally. You can have a signed digital document for your bill of lading, for your warehouse receipt. It's about making that trade more important, more open, the ability to transact that electronically. And of course, once we can go electronically, we can automate and we can get those benefits that are there from that side. European Commission. Earlier, the EUDI was touched on, and the wallet that sits behind that for the European identity, EIDAS 2. If you look at the schemas that are coming through, the LEI is listed as one of the organisation identifiers that's going to sit within that wallet to describe those associations. So there's a pull through from EUDI as well. The big one is probably SWIFT. You're all aware of the payment network. 2020, the ISO 20022 spec was updated. It now introduces LEI as an optional identifier for counterparties of the transaction. They're currently going through a consultation to look at making that mandatory. So they'll start with a subset of organisations, but then that will grow out. Again, individual jurisdictions are doing different levels of adoptions of that. Easy to refer back to the UK again. We have something called CHAPS, which is SWIFT compliant. CHAPS now from September next year, if you are a financial institution of certain types, you will have to put LEIs into your payment mechanism. You will have to have it in there. So we will see this growth coming through. And finally, verifiable credentials were touched on earlier today. The push for verifiable LEI as well. So pushing that into verifiable credentials and being able to exist in that SSI ecosystem alongside individual identity in that SSI ecosystem is already been put in place. So this gives us an open access, available, essentially quite simple to use organisation identity. Why is that important? How is that important? It's important because context matters, right? I'm up here today, Simon Wood. I'm talking to you. You're sitting there listening out of kindness, out of interest. Could be any of those. But I'm talking to you in a certain context. Now, I am a father, a husband, a customer. I mean, who knew it was bring a family to work day to day? We seem to have a recurring theme going on. But I'm not talking to you in that context. I'm talking to you as CEO of Ubisecure. In those two different contexts, I have different rights, different capabilities, different legal responsibilities that sit on me. And depending, although I'm the same identity, I'm the same individual, that doesn't change. My passport remains the same. The context in which I'm operating makes a big difference to the rights I should have, the capabilities I should have, the responsibilities that I must discharge. They change depending on that context. If your identity management system can't manage those contexts depending upon that situation, how can you manage individuals in that broadest sense? You need to pull all of this together to make that work. So having that context, having that link across the organisation that's being represented and the individual that's standing there representing, signing the contract, putting a digital signature, completing the documentation, placing the order, is critical to know that that actually fits and can deliver value to the business. It's this context and that combination that actually drives what we do at Ubisecure. And for us, it's our vision of the future of digital identity. And it's about taking that highly assured organisation identity, combining that with a strongly authenticated individual identity, and using that combination to show who you are, who you represent, and the rights that you have to represent them. That's all I wanted to go through today, bringing that introduction to organisation identity, why I think it's important, why I think it's going to be touching everyone in here as we go forwards, and small facts as well. The value of B2B transactions is 5 times the value of B2C transactions, and we spend a lot of time working on the identity of the C, but not so much on the B. But there's a complete mismatch in transaction value between that. We need to start looking at that organisation identity, and we need to start incorporating that into what we do as part of our identity management scenarios and propositions. Thank you very much. We've got a stand outside. If you want to come have a chat, ask any questions, very happy to talk through any of this, how we deliver this, more case studies. Thank you.